Hello, and welcome to Console Shock, Retro and Modern Gaming Chat with me, Trev, and as always, Stu. Before we get going, though, Stu is a massive fan of DLSS 5. He thinks it's great. He thinks it's going to, if it puts loads of animation studios out of business, if it replaces the art assets, he's all for the art assets being automatically replaced by AI. And he was more excited than Digital Foundry were in their video. He was like, I don't think you've read any of the response to it yet, have you, Stu? I think you kind of know.
On a serious note, I did watch the Digital Foundry video, and it does look really good. So I can't wait to get my hand on a new 5000 series card, get some DLSS 5 action going. And just really
replace all the characters in the games. Just replace the characters with whatever the AI generates.
Yeah, the faces just look so good. And the point is, with all the programmers not having to design faces all day, they can actually focus on making good games. You know what I mean? And actually,
anyone to do that, or you could even fire the people that do that normally and just have the computer do it.
Yeah, well, I know what you're saying. Yeah, fire the people and then sell the games for cheaper. To me, fire the programmers. That's what I say. Fire the programmers. AI. Yeah.
Okay,
you know what I want? I want more cat videos of them dancing. That's what there's not enough of them. There's not enough cat videos of them dancing.
Human characters with too many fingers and
exactly.
Facetious.
Everyone should have 7 fingers on each hand.
Every game will have that. Yeah, we're joking, of course. DLSS.
You might be joking, Trev. I'm not.
Yeah.
I'm joking.
The whole game. DLSS 6 should be the entire game is overwritten. You've got the actual game that you're playing, which is whatever it is, like Elder Scrolls or something, and you turn on DLSS 6, and it overwrites the game with like an AI-produced game.
Yeah.
It's got nothing to do with the actual game that you've turned the setting on for. It's made new characters, new everything. Not a human person was involved. It's all plagiarized bits of other games that the algorithm has been trained on, and that's it.
Yeah.
But you can turn it off and you'll go back to your Elder Scrolls game.
Yeah,
I think that's what we're looking at. Yeah, but anyway, it was a bit of a weird one, wasn't it? They made that video, and it does have benefits in certain areas, and it kind of screw things up royally in others. You've got a scene of a forest or something, and then you turn on DLSS 5 and the lighting completely changes to the point where it looks like a different time of day. So it's kind of broken the lighting in that sense. And then you've got obviously the yassify issues where, sort of a normal looking person in a game is sort of sexed up by, by the... And sometimes it does work. It just seems to add more detail but the actual shape of the face and the look of the person remains. But there's other times when it looks like a different character, like Resident Evil Requiem is obviously the example with the character in that. I've forgotten her name, whatever her name is.
Jill Valentine.
It's something. It's got to be one of them, isn't it? It's no one else.
Yeah, Jill Valentine or
Mila Jovovich, whatever her name is. Mila Jovovich. I can't remember what her name is, but and then. Sometimes I think it did improve things, like Starfield is very sort of potato-faced looking characters like the original Bolivian. That is what it was called in South America, Oblivion. It was called Bolivian.
Bolivia.
Yeah, and other times, Bolivia. The Elder Scrolls 4 Bolivia. I think in that instance where the character models maybe weren't that great, it helped to improve them a bit. But again, even then, there's an argument of, maybe that's what the artist, kind of ended up with, and that's their work, and maybe they're quite happy with that. And you're just, putting on a yassify filter and kind of crapping all over that. So I could see why it could benefit things, but also it's treading on eggs. it's on a thin line, isn't it?
Because I think what my actual opinion is there's all these people saying, oh, we've used no AI in this game. Now, okay, yeah, that's fair enough. If you want to make that statement, that's fine. If you don't want to make AI, but I think there's almost got to be sort of levels of sort of AI, because you don't want to go on to Super Mario Maker and go make me 20 levels, or here you go, and it's just AI rubbish. And I think people will use it, but then it's almost like it's got to be used sort of sensibly to to supplement, no. As a companion to the actual artists. And then on the other hand is what I was sort of thinking about this sort of earlier on today was if you're a small 2 or 3 man studio, actually a lot of these AI services are going to be actually quite useful to do a lot of the work that you potentially can't do, or to sort of bring in. And I know, that's potentially taking work from people, but, a small studio might not have the finance to go, okay, well, we'll get an artist to do, the backgrounds, or we'll get an artist to do this, we'll get an artist to do that. Well, they go, well, actually, we can get this done with AI. And so I think there are some sort of benefits to it. But, the more and more AI you see on videos of people and stuff like that. We made the joke at the start about videos of cats, but there are lots of sort of videos out there which we're constantly being thought, hold on, is this AI? Is this really that person talking? Is this that? There are subtle tells now, and someone made the comment, and we were talking about this at work, was 5-6 years ago there was like Will Smith eating spaghetti or something, and that looked like a mess. Spaghetti was going everywhere. It's all, I know, it didn't look right. You could tell that was AI, computer generated, whatever. But now you can't, or there might be little tells you might be a little bit unsure about. But what about in 6 months' time? What about a year's time? What about in 3 years' time, where AI is going to be? And another sort of thing about AI, I saw there was some video that came out with some large lady on a motorbike going down, being chased by a cow on a highway or a motorway somewhere, and she has an accident and it all flies everywhere. And it was something like, because of trash like this is why RAM costs a lot of money. And this is why your computer costs twice as much now, because of AI, and it's really, unfortunately, it's interesting in quite a weird way, because you just don't really know quite what you're watching. Are you getting someone's opinion? Trev, is this Stuart and Trevor now? Just we put into a program. First 10 minutes, talk about AI, then talk about the Macintosh for 50 minutes. Have they analysed our voice? Is that all people are getting here? I can say, obviously, this is not. This is, we're having a conversation about something that's, quite sort of passionate in the world at the moment. But, what's it going to be like in a year and things like that, and actually go and bring it back to games is going people saying, well, what if you think about it another way, if one game comes out and they go, okay, yeah, we've used AI for loads of this stuff, we've got the game out in a year, everyone loves the game, it's really good, and then another game, oh yeah, we've taken 6-7 years to make this game, it's got a huge world, we've used no AI, and in that time, I don't know, 5 or 6 of equally as good games have come out that have used AI, and it's I don't know, it's just a bit scary to sort of think about, really.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good point you're making about a very small studio that doesn't have the money to hire people to design some aspect of the game. It could benefit them then. I mean, there's still the issue. There's kind of no getting away from it, really. But there's still the issue of, are they going, because they're using AI, they're still kind of potentially using plagiarized stuff. Because the AI would have been trained on data that was from elsewhere. Unless there's some way around that where there's like an AI that could just come up with stuff without needing to, to have it sort of come from elsewhere.
I mean, you're absolutely right there. Plagiarism, obviously we're against that. The only things that we like to sort of copy are computer games. That's a bit tongue-in-cheek there, but...
Yeah.
That's a serious issue that you're not taking into account. Well, someone's AI could be, just lifting someone's face from somewhere else and popping it in, or using music that might have been, someone was their life's work to make this music, and it's just been lifted up, put into something else, changed ever so slightly, and that person hasn't got a job anymore. So. Yeah, no, I think that's sort of a serious issue, and I wouldn't know. People want to be sort of really pro AI. It's it's clearly the future, but then how do you go to the sort of the next? I don't know. Do you want to be the country that says, "Oh, no to AI," and then no one wants to make an IT company in your country? And
exactly. Yeah,
everyone takes their investments out and said, "Oh, the UK is not pro-business, or France is not pro-business, or America is not pro-business. We'll go and do everything in China. They'll let us do, whatever we want there." And so, I think, oh God, it's a real sort of big moral
debate.
issue. Yes.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens when NVIDIA if DLSS 5, when it releases, if it's sort of along the lines of what they showed us, or if there's such a backlash to it, which there has been, they might feel they've got to pull back on certain aspects of it. I mean, DLSS up until now has literally just been upscaling technology, just taking being able to run a game at a lower resolution internally, and then the DLSS algorithm will then blow that up to a much higher resolution, to the point when it's so good at it, you can't actually tell. It looks almost as good as the native version of that same, output resolution, and that was basically it. But now they're sort of incorporating these AI elements of it's going to, improve the look of characters and the lighting. That's kind of, a little bit beyond just, making the resolution look a bit nicer and having your games run better.
I heard, I listened to a report, it was about NVIDIA, and they were saying that, we talk about, when NVIDIA come up, we might talk about, the 50 series cards, we already mentioned that earlier, the graphics cards, the heritage of making GeForce cards and so on. But then of their annual revenue, 14% comes from graphics cards and 86% comes from all the AI, all the making all the chips for AI. And then we talk about a 5090, oh man, that's two grand. What is $2,500? Someone's probably going, no, it's $3,000 at the moment. But the point is, that's, in my mind, that's a lot of money for a graphics card. But then they sell AI chips for, okay, you need 50 of these, right? They're £300,000 dollars each, or you need 10,000 of them, or whatever you need, and it's on another level, the amount that people pay for these sort of next generation AI chips, whatever they are. I don't know, there might even be $1 million each, who knows, but it's NVIDIA now is purely sort of an AI company that just happens to have a little, side business a side hustle in making graphics cards for, sweaty gamers.
Yeah. I mean, the thing that I really like the technology behind DLSS in its current incarnation and FSR,
AMD
but the AMD version, I would like to think that eventually it will be a way that you can just always hit the maximum refresh of your monitor. And I think that's what they're kind of gunning for in, future sort of FSR versions, especially. They want to sort of minimize stuttering and things like that by using frame generation to kind of pad that out and smooth that out, and ultimately to hit the refresh rate of your monitor without adding tons of lag or anything. And that'll be great, and that'll make it easier for handheld devices, especially, to be able to hit good frame rates without image quality taking a hit. I've seen newer versions of DLSS and FSR taking resolutions as low as 360p, which is kind of not that far up from like a Game Boy Advance display or a PSP display, and actually having it look great at 4K and actually looking really good at 4K. So it's gotten really, really amazing. There's none of the smeariness or flickeriness or speckles or any of blocking issues that earlier versions had. So that stuff I'm really excited for, and that will get better. And like I say, with handhelds, and the Switch 2 is already kind of using DLSS to its advantage. Something the Steam Deck kind of has access to it with FSR, but it's kind of relying on older versions a lot of the time. So you often get that smeariness, and things can look a bit ugly, although the smaller screen often helps with that. But yeah, hopefully in the future that will continue to get better, and kind of the Steam machine is relying on that really in terms of being able to keep on par with like a PS5, running games at lower resolutions internally and outputting to 4K screens. So you'll be happy that you spent $2 or $3 on a Steam machine.
Well, you've got to think it's almost better for the if you buy a PC, you might be, oh god, I can't play this anymore. The graphics are, but I've had my computer now in May would be 3 years, and part of me thinks, 3 years on, I need to be starting to upgrade. Well, actually, I don't think I am. I'm going to be using the DLSS features. I'm going to be, maybe putting things down to medium, and plenty of games. I will lower the graphics options to get better performance, to make them last, or to get better performance. But then overall, it's these DLSS things or pieces of software or AI features, whatever they are. They will bring longevity to systems. So ideally, that potentially, I don't know if I'm making a completely wrong statement here, but they will use less power because there would be sort of older system or older sort of chips. Maybe, I don't know if that's right, but there's so people aren't going, okay, every year I need a new graphics card, and every game I play, I'll put it on, I'll 1440p it, and I'll get over 60 frames a second easily, and you might have to just sort of turn stuff down. I don't go on and put things on ultimate or ultra settings, or I'll leave that for people who want to spend $3-4 on a PC, and maybe in 2 years' time that's what I might do, but. You just sort of see how it goes, and they are doing, I think, lots of sort of positive things for the gaming sphere with all this upscaling and bits and pieces, and improving games. But I think it did seem, if you go back to DLSS 5, it's almost like putting different faces on people. And I think that's what. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
They shouldn't really be. It's not up for NVIDIA to give someone a face. That's up to the art. That's up to the designer. And if the designer goes into an AI face generator and puts it in, that's probably what they do anyway. But the point is, they've decided on what the face is going to be, and they don't want some AI thing making it. We're going to make all the faces 10% sexier. But the AI upscaling should be there to, I always want to hit 60 frames a second. I always want things to be smooth. I want to have longevity with the game. That's what you want, isn't it?
Yeah, basically, yeah. Well, we'll see what happens with it. There was obviously there's obviously been a big backlash, and DF got a big bit of a brunt of it, unfortunately, due to their sort of enthusiasm for it, without really thinking about, the how what you said.
Digital Foundry are all about hardware, and they'll review games,
technology,
and technology. That's their realm. So actually, what the technology does is actually quite amazing. And the whole thing is, well, if you look at it from that point of view, wow, it's great. They're changing all the faces to make them more detailed. Oh, that's brilliant. Yeah, love it. From a technology point of view, but then from a gaming point of view, because you don't watch a Digital Foundry review because you want to know, is it a good story? What's it like? What are the characters like? What's this like? You go on there for a performance review, and then if you want to watch,
that's right.
Yeah, other things. So I think they're well within their right to say, oh wow, this is amazing technology, which it is. It's just it's not quite doesn't quite sit well with people.
They had their little QA video. They had their little QA video a few days after that initial one, and Rich sort of said like, oh, we should have waited for the public sort of reaction to it all. But I'm like, well, does that mean we would have waited for the public reaction, then changed our opinion to sort of match it?
No, they should have their own opinion. You don't.
Oh, yeah, exactly,
if you go and get on a review of the latest, whatever game, what's that Crimson Desert that's coming out now? And I'm not going to watch 10 reviews and get an aggregate of what they all say, and then I'll write my review based on what 10 other people say. I'll play the game and write my own review of it. And if I like it, no one else does, or if I hate it and everyone else likes it, well, so be it. But that's your opinion. So you've got to analyse things and give them the time to analyse it, and then come out with your own opinions on it. Not to. I don't know, just wait. Oh yeah, IGN said they didn't like it, or I've used this analogy before, but Sweaty Gamer on Reddit doesn't like it, so we won't like it either.
I think with Crimson Desert, they just need to put a nice bit of DLSS 5 on that. That'll fix it right up. But anyway,
that's it.
We're not going to get deeper into the whole the rabbit hole of
AI
DLSS 5. What we do want to talk about, something we like to try and do, well, we've done it for a couple of years now. When we hit March every year, though we're at the end of March now, possibly when the episode is released, it might even be April. There's a sort of an annual tradition on YouTube where we celebrate the Mac and everything about that line of computers, and it's called Marchintosh. We've done it for a couple of years. Well, last year we did do, we looked at a couple of Macworld magazines, and we sort of compared the prices and where the technology was in those days, and actually got a lot of fond sort of memories of magazines that were chock full of adverts. There was plenty of those in those Macworld issues, probably still are to this day, actually, although Macworld isn't actually physically published anymore, but in fact, Mac format's pretty much the only one that's left. But we're not going to be looking at a magazine. We're going to look at a specific piece of hardware. We've touched upon it a few times in the past, but we're going to sort of focus on it solely for this episode, just because of what it means in, how a particular kind of form factor of device has evolved. It was kind of a real line in the sand as to where things moved on. And that's the Titanium PowerBook G4. So to give you a very sort of basic overview of the Titanium PowerBook G4, so Apple had laptops beginning, well, there was the Mac Portable, which came out in 1989, and that was a giant chunk of a thing. It was really not a laptop. It was basically a luggable. It was kind of a big chunk of a unit with a fold-down screen over the keyboard, and you would basically had a handle that you then carry it around like a suitcase. That was the Mac Portable. That came out in 89. And then it wasn't until a couple of years later in 91 that we had the first PowerBooks that were the traditional laptop form factor that we think of these days. Literally, a screen that sort of a notebook shape, an L shape effectively when it's open sideways, with the screen at the back, the keyboard pushed to the back, and then a pointing device just in front of the keyboard with kind of armrests to the side of the pointing device. Actually, there's an interesting point about that kind of configuration of that lower body of the laptop. Was a thing that Apple pioneered. Before then, laptops kind of had the pointing device all over the place. Sometimes the keyboard would just stop at the very edge of the unit, so your palms and wrists would kind of just flop down, underneath that onto like your thighs or onto the table, and the pointing device might be something that was, attached to the side separately. But it was Apple that sort of pushed the keyboard back to leave a space at the front, and then a trackball was then placed in the middle, and you had an area for your palms and your hands to rest while you were typing the keyboard. The original line of PowerBooks, the 100 series, in 1991 established that. I do have a PowerBook 100, but it doesn't work. Unfortunately, they're due to age now. They're very difficult to find ones that work. A lot of things go wrong with them, like CMOS batteries and capacitors and screens that fail. Very, very cool piece of hardware, though, the original PowerBook 100. It was very thin, very light, and basically pinned down that traditional notebook form factor back in 1991. And from that point on, those laptops, the PowerBook range evolved. Initially, it started off with a 68,000 processor on that. The PowerBook 100 was kind of the budget bottom level spec machine. The same 68K chip that you would have found, in the original Mac, but obviously a slightly better, more faster version of that. With the RAM would have been faster and faster storage and all of that. It didn't have an optical drive, or not an optical drive. Well, they weren't a thing then in 91, but it did have a disk drive. But the disk drive was actually a separate unit. To keep the thing small, they had to limit the amount of things that were inside it. A disk drive would have been added too much bulk, so they actually had that as an external accessory. The step-up machines from that PowerBook 100 included the disk drive. They were a bit bulkier. The PowerBook I think the 140 and the 180 were the models that you went up to from that, or 170, sorry. The 140 and the 170 all came out when that first 1991 initial release. But yeah, the models evolved through the years. We got to the mid-90s, late 90s. Apple moved from those 68K chips to the PowerPC chips. Initially, the pointing devices were trackballs, and they changed to trackpads. The screens got bigger. There was mono options initially and color options, and then eventually it was just color options. But they mostly kind of stayed fairly similar. They were still quite chunky, often either grey plastic or black plastic. And it kind of reached an apex, I guess, when you got to around 2000. You had the PowerBook G3, which had the G3 processor in there. These are very powerful laptops for their day as well, and compared, favorably with the Windows sort of Intel machines that were doing the rounds at this point in time. In fact, a lot of the time they would be faster. And among the most powerful laptops you could actually buy were those G3, those PowerPC laptops, culminating with the G3 and the G4. But yeah, we got to that point in the end of 2000. Had the PowerBook G3, which is fairly, it doesn't really look that different from a Windows laptop of the same vintage. It's 4x3 screen, black plastic, keyboard, trackpad. Still actually a cool looking design, but nothing that really made it stand out massively from, a decent looking like a Sony Vaio of the time. Some might even have a preference for the Vaios of that time period. But what was the real big change came January 2001. Apple obviously wanted to stick the new G4 processor into a laptop, and they did so with the Titanium PowerBook G4. And what was amazing about the PowerBook G4, it really is, kind of the first modern laptop. Like laptops, when you look at a PowerBook G4 Titanium, next to like a modern day MacBook Pro, they actually look fairly similar. There's nothing really particularly clunky about the PowerBook G4. The screen is a wide screen on the PowerBook G4, 16 by 10. It's 15 inch. The bezel is absolutely tiny around the screen. In fact, it's still smaller than some modern MacBooks. The keyboard was, again, still that same design set up against the display with a trackpad in front of it, but it was extremely thin, like an inch thin when the lid was closed. And it just looked great with it didn't really follow the design aesthetics of the iMacs of the time and the Power Macs, which had that kind of almost jelly kind of candy look with the see-through plastic and the colored plastic. That the iMac was famous for. The PowerBooks never really followed that at all when the first iMac came out that had that, aesthetic. It was metallic colored. You had kind of a white border around the body, and then the middle was kind of silver colored along with the bezels. And it just looked cool with a slot loading optical drive, so there wasn't a big clunky tray that would come out, although slot loading drives have their issues as well. And really, really cool. And looking at when it was released, actually looking at an issue of Macworld UK, it came out with a 400 megahertz G4, or you could spend a bit more and get a 500 megahertz G4. The 400 megahertz was £1,899, which on today's money, you could easily slap another £1,000 on that. You could possibly even double it, I think, in today's money. And with that, you got that 400 megahertz G4, DVD drive, the display 15.2 inches, active matrix TFT. TFT screens were kind of still a bit more premium. There was super twist-o-matic screens, STN screens, which were a bit cheaper, were on more budget laptops at the time, but would be very blurry. TFT screens are much like the ones we have now, a lot more clearer, a lot faster refresh rates. The resolution of that screen was 1152 by 768, so quite low by today's standards, but pretty decent for the time. And you got, I'm trying to see some of the specs here that are all written out. You had two USB ports in the back. You had a FireWire port, and these ports at the back would actually be hidden behind a little flap that you could flip down, and then all the ports would be revealed at the back. I do like having those at the back as well, because when you sort of have ports on one side and not the other, you might struggle with plugging in accessories, particularly a mouse, when you might have to have the cable come all around the back. With everything on the back, those ports, then they can kind of just poke out to whatever, side of your laptop that you need them to have to poke out to, the wires. And yeah, that's kind of a quick overview of the Titanium PowerBook G4. So do you remember seeing these, Stu, around the time they were released, or was it much later?
I remember seeing more the iBooks, and there was the white iBook as well, or was that a PowerBook G3? They're the ones that I remember sort of seeing at university, and then or slightly after that, and then people would have those, and it became this thing of going to the the coffee shop or in a bar, and and you sort of think about it. In those days there wasn't the Wi-Fi, so I think a lot of people wrote their essays on them, and edited music and photos, and did lots of productivity work.
It's an interesting point actually there, Stu, because with regard to the Wi-Fi, that was really just making its start around the time the Titanium G4 came out, and it did support Wi-Fi. It was 802.11b in those days, 11 megabits a second, which is obviously a fraction of what we're capable of having now. But it wasn't built in. You had to get a card, an airport card, and that would allow you to do Wi-Fi on the Titanium. Yeah.
Yeah, but I think you would only actually ever use that at home, wouldn't you? Or if you worked for a design company, and then they had their offices
Some
with
airports.
Potentially
the technology, but actual airports, some of them might have had it, but yeah, your average coffee shop, certainly in the UK, wouldn't have any of that stuff.
I'm sure there's a coffee shop in San Francisco or Palo Alto, whatever it's called. I'm sure had it, but it seemed like there was, in my point of view, I was fully engrossed in the Windows PC laptop world, and they were just straight. It was a desktop and then down into a laptop, and you would use that for for your word processing and a little bit of light browsing when you're at home. Maybe I used to play Age of Empires on my PC, but then it was always the Apple laptops. They always looked a lot sort of cleaner, a lot sort of funkier, or things like that. And in my mind, it was we're going. What was the Mac used for? And that was more for productivity software. And I remember that, in my mind, it was, all the software I download, you get little programs to do this, programs to do that, or and they're all available on Windows. So I thought, oh God, having a Mac would be. I just think I never had one for 10 years before that. So I had Windows 95, 98, ME, XP, and so on. So I was never really in that sort of ecosystem of Macs. So, to have one, it was never really in my wheelhouse. But, a few years ago, I did pick up an Apple Power Mac G4 Titanium, and it's an absolutely... you're right what you said about what a modern looking sort of laptop it is now, and obviously due to the size of it, you can tell that it's an older laptop now, but then it's still lots of design design keys that point to how laptops are today. The small bevel, the touchpad in the middle, sort of chrome. Not chrome color, sort of a brushed steel, and that's what laptops are today. And you might get different colors of aluminium. You might get, obviously they're thinner now. They tend to have less ports than they used to. They were sort of on the back of a laptop. There was just like the whole back of it was just ports, and a DVD drive or something on the left or the right, and there was a lot more to it. And now, like the new Macs that come out is, the latest one, the Neo, as it was, it got two USB-C ports, and one of those is a little bit underpowered. So, from my point of view, it's it was a sort of amazing machine, but at the time, when you saw, as I would say, sort of arty people, or people that worked in an architect's office or designers, it was the perfect machine for them. But for me, it probably wasn't the perfect machine. So I don't have any regrets about not having one, in 2001 or 2002, because I was happy with what I was doing with my desktop and laptops at the time. Where's he gone? You're on mute.
Oh yeah, sorry. Every time I take a sip of water, I'm always like, oh God, I got to put my mute on. Yeah, it's the same here, really. I was in the sixth form, when this thing came out. There was no way I was going to have like a $2,000 laptop, and to be honest, there wasn't really a lot I would have used it for at that point in time. Funnily enough, though, my first encounter with one was in the sixth form. I was doing an IT A level, and weirdly, like it was kind of pally with the IT department. We all were really in this IT A level, and they'd always have funny little gadgets and things that they'd be mucking around with in their office. And I was in there one day, and they had an Apple laptop, and I was like, "Oh my god, what's that?" We didn't really see Apple hardware much in the UK outside of those design kind of circles. And I was like, "Oh, cool! I'd like to see that." And it looked like it was from the future, and he actually let me, like, "Here you go, you can muck around on it for a bit if you want." I was like, "Oh, really?" It was like, yeah. So I took it away and opened it up, and just was in awe of like how thin it was, how futuristic it looked. And I was like, oh, I'm never going to be able to afford to buy anything as amazing as this. I mean, now I've got 3 Titanium PowerBook G4s, obviously a lot cheaper than they were then.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, I was kind of blown away by it. Obviously, widescreen, which was something that wasn't really on any other PC laptops. Of quite a high resolution screen. Mac OS in itself was something I never really mucked around with. And I remember I played a DVD on it. That in itself was really cool, to like play a DVD on a laptop, like a movie, and watch a movie on a laptop, which is, a DVD was something that I'd be used to, putting a DVD in a big chunk of a DVD player that was hooked up to my TV to be able to do that. I didn't think it was something I could kind of almost have in sat on my lap in the palm of my hands. So that was kind of amazing as well. I don't know what exact model that they had. It could have been a little bit later in the year as opposed to that very first January 2001 model. But when you look at some of these specs, it's kind of quaint now. I mentioned some of them already, but yeah, 400 megahertz G4. It's got 128 megabytes of RAM as standard. I mean, God, 16 is kind of the average now, gigabytes. That's, we're orders of magnitude beyond that now. It had ATI mobility, ATI Rage mobility graphics, 128. And yeah, that would have been good enough to drive the screen and probably play, Mac games from the previous sort of years, things like Quake 2 and maybe going into the 90s. You'd be able to play those games at high sort of settings. You might struggle with anything kind of a bit more contemporary sort of PS2 era. But yeah, might be able to run some of that stuff though, actually, going past that, 2001. The 10 gigabyte hard drive. So again, that's, even like a low end kind of USB stick these days would be 10 gigabytes. And it was ready for wireless networking. Airport, as we mentioned before, 802.11b. But you would need to buy a separate card that you just plug straight in. And then that would give you access to Wi-Fi if you've got somewhere that had it back then. And yeah, a couple of USB 1.1s, FireWire. You had a PC card slot, which is very handy. PowerBook G4 Titaniums I actually use that card slot to add more modern Wi-Fi, because that 802.11b airport card often will not connect now to modern Wi-Fi networks because of the security. It has an older version of security that newer Wi-Fi routers don't support. But if you get you can add more modern Wi-Fi via that PC card slot, and the cards you can jack into there, and VGA and S-Video. And it had a 50 watt hour battery. And I think they sort of quoted you could get like maybe 2 to 3 hours from that battery, which is pretty decent for a laptop in those, especially what really would be a high-end laptop in those days. They didn't really, if you wanted a lower-end Apple laptop, you'd go for an iBook. The iBook was around at this point in time. It kind of looked like a seashell or like a toilet seat, like a sort of funny coloured toilet seat. But that was a pretty cool laptop, but it'd be much cheaper, like around £1,000 in those days. Still expensive actually in those days, but a lot cheaper than a PowerBook. That was where you'd go for that. Another cool thing about it as well is it could be set up to dual boot, and all of mine do this. So you can boot into the classic Mac OS, so basically Mac OS version 9.2, and you can also boot into Mac OS 10. And you can choose which one you want to boot into. the reason for that in these days, Apple was going through a transition from that classic Mac OS into Mac OS 10. They kind of weren't really mutually compatible, so you kind of had to use one or the other. Software had to be rewritten for Mac OS 10, and there was a period of time where there wasn't a Mac OS 10 version of something. So you had to go and use the Mac OS 9 version. So you might have to switch between the two. If, you know, I've only got the Mac OS 9 version of Word, I've got to jump into Mac OS 9. But my Photoshop, I've got the latest Mac OS 10 version of that, so I can boot into Mac OS 10. Later on, you could run Mac OS 9 apps in OS 10. There was a kind of, it would run them and it would look like, the app would look like Mac OS 9 app within 10. But it was a little bit clunky and you would get glitchiness, especially with things like games and things like that. So it's helpful to be able to just boot straight into native kind of Mac OS 9. Well, that's great nowadays because obviously there's a ton of games that, you know, were written for classic Mac OS. Those will run on a Titanium PowerBook G4. The generation after the Titanium PowerBook G4, the Aluminium G4, which is kind of an upgrade from the Titanium, they can't boot into Mac OS 9. So you've got to use that kind of Mac OS things running in Mac OS 10 software. It's called Classic on those Aluminium PowerBooks. So you kind of will have to deal with the clunkiness and the glitching and things like that. There's no way around it. But the earlier Titaniums will work, boot into OS 9, which is great, especially for games which tend to not run very well under that classic in Mac OS 10 environment. And they did upgrade the Titanium PowerBook all the way up to the last models ran at 1 gigahertz. They were the first Apple laptops to hit that 1 gigahertz speed, CPU speed of the G4. And that was in 2002. And that was basically the end of the Titanium, the 15-inch Titanium PowerBook. They didn't really release like a smaller version or a bigger version. It was just the 15-inch model in January of 2003. So kind of 2 years from that introduction of the Titanium, they announced the Aluminium PowerBook G4, where they changed them, you know, the material used to produce the body of the laptop changed from titanium to aluminium, as obviously tell from the name. And basically they did continue to sell the Titanium as the 15-inch model. The aluminium was introduced as a 17-inch and a 12-inch. That sort of sat between the Titanium, which carried on for a little while. And then we got to like September of 2003 and they introduced an aluminium 15-inch PowerBook G4, and that basically ended the Titanium. And the aluminium was actually where I jumped in with Apple laptops a couple of years later on, near the ending sort of couple of years of the PowerPC era. But yeah, it's kind of funny, isn't it, Stu, to think that it was only really for 2 years that we had that sort of iconic Titanium, you know, that silver and white and the silver sort of main body of the unit with the white border around the keyboard and the black keys. That was gone within 2 years. When you think now, Mac laptops kind of look the same and have done for about, 10 plus years now.
Yeah, they slightly changed.
Really interesting.
Yeah, slightly changed the features, don't they? But I mean, I have to admit that it wasn't until sort of looking into them years ago, as in 5-6 years ago, I was actually aware of that. And, and I was sort of thinking back to... Yeah. I was going to ask you a question. When I was after university, I went to live in Canada for a year, and in the house I shared, the landlady, a friend of mine, Mia, she had an Apple computer, and that was sort of sat up on a desk, and that was a tower, and so I think that was an iMac tower, and because that came out around 2001, 2002, and so that was my. So I'd go on there in the evening. It wasn't my computer, so when she wasn't using it, or there's a couple of other people in the house, we sort of shared this computer, and I'd go on there to check my emails, email my mum at home, but that was thinking about that. That was sort of almost before Facebook, before I don't know, MySpace potentially. So I think I probably went on there to, look up football scores, or, email my mum, or, check the news back at home, or, see what was going on, or maybe sort of investigate, what places I could sort of visit. But so I remember I did actually, but all I remember was that I sort of knew how to turn it on, and I think it was Mac OS 10 on there, because I'll know to go to the symbol with look like a compass, and then that was Safari. So that was where I went to go online. So I'll just go on there and do my sort of internet browsing. It was set up in the table in the corner of the living room, and it was always and I remember it didn't have a Macintosh screen. It had a just what I was calling a normal CRT monitor that could be used for a PC or something. And so I did back in the day have a bit of experience of using that, but then I used it a lot, but only really for sort of internet sort of browsing and stuff.
Yeah, it's interesting that talking about the Power Mac, which it looks like you would have used, the sort of Mac Tower of that sort of early 2000s era. That's probably a chance that you used. If it was a Power Mac G4, they kind of had more of the aesthetic of the iMac, that kind of jelly bean, translucent plastic, and then
definitely.
It did change later on. They did change it in 2003 with the Power Mac G5 into that kind of cheese grater look that is kind of more known, and then the Mac Pro kept that kind of big silver metallic cheese grater sort of body. But before then, they were more like they did look more like a sort of a tower version of an iMac. But the PowerBook was kind of a design. The Titanium was a design unto itself, really. They didn't try and really adapt that look of silver aluminium, black keys onto any of the other devices. It kind of was kind of stood out, which made it stand out against the other devices.
I think they sort of build everything, because like an iMac, that's for students. That's for university students and students at school. That's your educational world. That had the lower power and so on.
Yeah, and sort of like people, your home users, your internet users at home, and
But you couldn't imagine a professional person go, oh, I really like being in the Mac ecosphere. I want to use a Mac laptop, and they bring out some orange laptop that's a funny shape. It just doesn't work. So then, of course, you have the more powerful machines. So the G4 Titanium and PowerBook Titanium and so on, that have a more sort of business look. So they took the business look from before you had. I'm messing up everything here, but the black plastic, because that's what laptops always were, black plastic or grey plastic. And then they thought, well, actually, we're going to go down the route of we'll have flashy white, or we'll have, all different colours. That's for students, that's for young people, that's for old people to do their bits and bobs on. But actually, for the professional people, then you're going to have the aluminium, the titanium, and then obviously that's kind of, if you think about it, that's kind of carried on, because if you look at the new ranges of laptops, the Pros or the M5 Ultra Max, whatever, they come out with black or silver. That's it. They're your two options. And then like the Air or the new Neo will come out in yellow, rose gold, pink, red, all these other different, anodized aluminium colors that are really sort of, look at me. I've got a Mac here. I'm a creative person. But again, you look at the Neo, like I can't imagine, someone who's, a professional person, they go to a meeting, they're going to bring out, an M5 Max, aren't they, or whatever, and then they'll go through their Revit models, and they'll use all the power from the computer. But then obviously the Neo and the the Air, that's designed for someone who wants to go to a cafe and just chill out, send some emails, and catch up on the latest episode of Review Tech USA or something like that. That's what they want to follow. And a little bit of video editing in there, which you can do on them now easily, even the cheaper models. So the other sort of devices that Apple had in their range at that time didn't kind of adopt that very business looking look really until 2003. We had the PowerBook G5, which got rid of the translucent plastic and the jelly bean appearance. It was a very serious looking, straight lines, no curved bits really, no separate funny little panels and sticky out buttons and things. It was a kind of a titanium PowerBook aesthetic really. And then there was the aluminium PowerBooks, which kind of just evolved the look of the titanium. And then the iMac actually kind of toned down as well. We went from the jelly bean like iMac, and we went to the sunflower iMac, which was like the separate flat screen panel display coming off an arm like a lampshade, going down into like a base that sat at the bottom of your screen, the bottom of the table, and weighed the whole thing. So that's kind of more of a fun looking thing, but it was silver and white. It wasn't funny colors or anything. And then a year after that, we got the iMac G5, which is kind of what iMacs look like now, a square panel with just like the stand attached to it. It was a bit chunkier with that initial 2004 version, but it was just a plain color white with a silver stand, and that was it. So it was really the titanium that almost like dictated the look. And also the iBook. We've already said that you're kind of like a jelly bean toilet seat. Straight after that, after the titanium, it got redesigned itself the next year. I think in 2002 or two. Actually, no, I think 2001. I think later on in 2001, we got the iBook G3 update, which basically made it into the white kind of pure white design with the white keyboard. That's what I remember seeing people use. Yeah, and that looked more like a normal laptop. It still looked a lot different to your average PC laptop, but it was kind of more in line with the very plain kind of straight-laced kind of design look that the titanium PowerBook introduced. It's just really, really interesting, and that's kind of carried on to this day. They don't have loads of fun paneling and like clunky-looking buttons that poke out, and different. Obviously, there's no translucent plastic or anything like that. All of that, the seed kind of sprung out from that titanium PowerBook G4, and that's why when I say, if you take a titanium PowerBook G4 and place it next to any kind of modern laptop, and it doesn't really look like a laptop that's 20 years older or 25 years now, which is insane, than the one it sat next to that's from last year or this year. The only sort of kind of clunkiness that you might see now is if you look at like the ton of ports at the back. When you flip the flap down at the back, you've got all the DVI or S-Video and all of that. Really, a laptop really has a couple of USB-C, and that's it. A lot of the time now. And there are some vents on either side for the fans, although laptops now can have fans and have vents on them. Not Macs, because they tend to be passively cooled a lot of the time with the M chips. It hasn't really aged at all. And like I say, like the bezels on the display are often thinner than some of the bezels you get on a modern laptop now. In fact, the aluminium that came out after the titanium, I think the bezels got thicker again. So it took quite a few years later to match. I think the current era of MacBook Airs and MacBook Pros might have matched the titanium in terms of the thin bezels on the display. I think it's also worth talking about how I'm sitting next here to my partner's. She's got a Surface laptop. And then, all the design cues for this Surface laptop have gone back to, very similar to a Mac. And you see things like laptops from Dell. They're all, and I was sort of thinking, all laptops. I was going to make the statement that all laptops look like, early, MacBooks. And actually, I was going to say, well, they do, except for, gaming ones where they stick a great big bright green dragon on the back or something where there's a lighting.
RGB lighting.
Yeah, so I think every laptop, except for gaming laptops, is very influenced by, the design aesthetic of, going back to, the titanium, the aluminium, and the MacBook Pros and so on from there. And it's you pick up one of those and you know exactly what you need to do with it, and I don't think you could say the same about a Windows laptop from 2000. You might be, how does this little nipple in the middle work? How do I move the pointer around?
Exactly, yeah.
And you'd work it out. But with a MacBook, they were very. I think they're. I almost want to say form over function, but they're great function, great form. They work really well. Yeah.
And in terms of owning Titanium PowerBook G4s in the modern day, I mentioned that I've got sort of 3 of them now. I've got the 2 later models, which are right at the very end of the life of the Titanium. We said it was like 2 years that it kind of existed within the Apple kind of ecosystem. I've got like an 867 megahertz model and a 1 gigahertz. So they were the very last ones really to come out, last revisions to come out. And I've also got a 600 megahertz one, which was the sort of the revision before that. Might even be a couple of revisions before, so slightly older one. They do have issues nowadays. Obviously, batteries are always going to be an issue with old laptops. Yeah. They will die. Good thing about them is you can actually take the battery out, and if there is a new one that you can get hold of somehow, either someone's rebuilt one or someone's selling old stock, which I might be a bit wary of if they are. When it comes to batteries, you can slap a new one in. You can't do that with modern laptops. Often, the batteries are sealed within it, and then that's why they become e-waste when those batteries are no longer usable. But yeah, there's that. The hinges on the display weren't a great design. And in fact, the display cables kind of feed through the hinges. So if you have display issues like with lines appearing or pixels dying, it might be because that display cable has been flexed so much that it started to fail. And the hinges themselves also break. So that means obviously the laptop screen kind of comes clean off from the body or becomes very loose. Luckily, none of mine have that issue. So I try and sort of baby them as much as I can. And then the last sort of thing really, they'll start to come off around the white sort of
that's happened to mine.
Surrounding frame. Because the paint they were painted. They weren't hard anodized like the later aluminium Macs were. So that paint does chip off. So trying to get one in good nick that has got the paint intact can be quite difficult. Mine aren't too bad though. Which is pretty good, but they're quite easy to upgrade. Certainly the RAM, you literally have a couple of latches on the keyboard that you just press up, and the keyboard just flips down, and you've got access to the RAM slot right there. So you can buy RAM and just max out the RAM. Of the later models could take up to 1 gigabyte, and then you could obviously with the hard drives that needs a bit more surgery, but it's not too difficult. You can get in there and put an SSD in. And in terms of the software, I mean, I use macOS 9.22, the last classic macOS, and macOS 10.4, which is kind of one of the later macOS 10s that it can run. It can do Leopard 10.5, but I think 10.4 is a bit of a better compromise because it runs a bit faster than 10.5. But yeah, really great, especially macOS 9 for running some of those late 90s. Early 2000s Mac games like Tomb Raider and Quake 2, Quake 1, Doom, Duke Nukem, Tony Hawk skateboarding, Star Trek Elite Force. So then early ones like Secret of Monkey Island and Flashback, and a lot of games, a lot of Amiga games, in fact, that ended up with Mac ports. You can often have those on they'll run great on the Titanium G4, SimCity 2000. Often they'll be a bit better than the DOS versions as well. They might have better sound, slightly enhanced graphics and things like that. And some macOS games as well, macOS 10 games. Some of the earlier macOS 10 games. And you could even possibly try running Halo on it, although the earlier models would struggle. But the later 1 gigahertz one, you might be able to hit 30 FPS with the Mac OS version.
Yeah, let's not bother with that.
You might, it might be a bit dangerous.
Yeah.
You can just about still get them online. I mean, browser support obviously died a long time ago. They're really kind of, just for, I mean, you could still type documents on them and do very basic photo editing, low resolution photo editing. You wouldn't want to try and edit videos or anything like that with, it's certainly not anything you want to have look good or at high resolutions. But obviously playing old games, perhaps, some light office work. I mean, obviously for me, it's just playing old games, really. But yeah, they're just, they're really great machines. They're fairly cheap to pick up these days. You might have to pay a little bit more for one in good condition. But they're probably my favorite, classic Mac. I'm always mucking around on the ones that I have and finding old games that I didn't realize and getting them running on there. Normally they'll always run really well. They're a really good sort of middle ground between the modern era of Macs that we're currently, that is now, I guess. The super early era of like the original 1984 Mac. They're kind of a good middle ground between those two eras. They kind of touch both of them. Probably a bit closer to where we are now because that design is kind of timeless and doesn't look 25 years old at all. But yeah, that's the Titanium PowerBook G4, my favorite Mac. So anybody hasn't really investigated anything when it comes to Apple laptops and you want to learn a bit more about milestones, there's that PowerBook 100 we talked about. And then you want to look at the Titanium G4 because it's really got us to where we are today with modern laptops. But anyway, Stu, where can you find us on the internet?
We're everywhere, so you can find us on consoleshock.net, our website. You can find us on Twitter, search Console Shock, Facebook, search Console Shock, and any podcast client, again, search Console Shock, and then you'll find our episode. So please subscribe to us. It'd be much appreciated, and thank you very much.
Well, we hope you enjoyed today's episode all about the Titanium PowerBook for Marchintosh 2026. I'm sure we'll be doing another Marchintosh next year. I'll hope you'll be able to join us then for that one as well. But thanks for listening today. Take care, and we'll see you in the next one.
Take it easy, guys. Bye-bye.